Hi everyone. Today we will read a paragraph from the Rav's book Nano, Technology for the Soul, Mind over Matter. And one big topic that's often discussed is greed. That greed is ruining our world, ruining our relationships. And the Rav has a very insightful perspective about greed. And the Rav differentiates that greed is not just greed, but the Rav differentiates between enlightened greed and senseless greed on page 87 in the book. And the Rav explains there are two ways to receive fulfillment from life, and both ways are founded upon greed. So the Rav already makes clear greed can be used in two ways, and everything in this physical world can be used for the good or for bad. So something is not just negative, it depends what you use it for. And firstly, there's what I characterize as senseless greed, the Rav explains. This form of greed is motivated exclusively by the metaphysical entity known as the adversary or as ego or as receiving consciousness. This form of greed serves to gratify the ego at the expense of the soul. And a very important concept, either we strengthen our soul, feed our soul, or we feed our ego. Like the famous story about the Indian chief and his son, where he tells him there are two wolves within you. And the kid asks the chief, which wolf will win? And the chief tells him, it depends which one you feed. And the Rav boils it down more. What are these two wolves? The one is the senseless greed, only short-term gratification, only what I need right now, what I want right now. And whenever you receive with that consciousness, you're in opposition to the light, meaning the light is only a consciousness of sharing, of giving. If you only receive for yourself alone, there's no affinity anymore. It's not that the light doesn't want to give, it's only sharing. But it cannot share with you because you don't have an affinity with. This is like if you have someone who only talks about the subject that you're completely not interested in. There's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to share with one another. That's what happens with us when we only act according to the senseless greed. The greed that we have called an enlightened greed serves one purpose alone, which is to fulfill the soul with a constant flow of fulfillment at the expense of the ego. As we said before, it can be only one or the other. Unlike senseless greed, enlightened greed delivers temporary pain to one's ego. It's uncomfortable for a moment. It's not pleasurable. Like when you go to the gym, it's not so nice at the beginning, but afterwards you feel great. Because afterwards it provides a connection to the tree of life reality. Everything is from the light, everything is for the good. The infusion of energy that accompanies such a connection serves to diminish the ego negativity in one's life. The results are lasting, thus it is far more shrewd and profitable life choice. Enlightened greed means we share, we resist selfishness, and we resist receiving. Instead, we emulate the light of the Creator so that by virtue of law of attraction, our souls achieve closeness and connection with the divine energy that fills the tree of life reality. For the student of Kabbalah, it all boils down to senseless greed versus enlightened greed, or receiving versus sharing. And that's also what we need to think about. Which greed, which desires that I have are senseless. And the Rav says our problem is not that there's too much greed. Our problem is actually that there's not enough greed, meaning that we think about the long-term consequences of our actions, of our words, of our thoughts. If we would consider the long-term actions, reactions, effects, we would act and speak completely different. And that's why we actually need to intensify our greed for lasting fulfillment and not compromise for short-term fulfillment. So think for yourself, which greed is senseless and how can I turn it into enlightened greed? Enjoy the process, desire much light, and all the best.